Thank you, and welcome to the December 20th, 2022 Curriculum Subcommittee meeting. We have a quorum of members present, and so we'll go ahead and get started. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the October 18th, 2022 meeting, which I have read and reviewed and would be willing to move if there's a second. Okay, I see Stephen as a second. We need to roll call vote. Suzanne?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And Stephen, I mentioned Mrs. Charlevsky will not be joining us for our meeting today. So
Yeah.
we have quorum. So the minutes are approved. I don't know if Leslie had planned to say some words before we started our next agenda item. Do Michelle or Gabe know if she was planning on saying some words? Well, I can't hear you, Michelle, but I'm trying to read your lips.
We're having some technical problems in town hall with our internet. So she's trying to, we'll get there.
Okay. Okay. No worries. No worries.
Otherwise, she'll come on my computer.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. And so maybe we could take a minute I like to try to remember for us all to introduce ourselves so that anyone from the community who might be watching will know who we are. So I'm Jennifer Monopoly. I'm a member of the school committee and chair of the curriculum subcommittee. Do other members of the subcommittee want to introduce themselves as well?
Hi, I'm Stephen Ehrenberg. I'm also on the curriculum subcommittee, as you can see.
And hi, I'm Suzanne Ferrisfield. I'm on the school committee and on the curriculum subcommittee.
And then maybe Gabe, Michelle, and Kyle, if you could introduce yourselves and tell people what your role is, that would be helpful. Am I the only one who can't hear or? Okay.
I think so. I can hear.
You could hear Gabe? No.
I can hear
no.
others.
Oh, okay. But I couldn't hear Gabe. You wanted to, and you were unmuted, which is what was strange, Gabe. Could you try again for us? Wow. Nope. Okay. Well, so Gabe McCormick is joining us. Let's see, he's trying again, I think. Maybe Michelle, do you want to go while we're waiting? Wow, we really have been struggling today with the tech. Okay. It's no one's fault. It just is.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm Michelle Herman, and I'm the senior director for teaching and learning in grades pre-K through 8.
Okay. And I don't want to get Gabe's title wrong, but I believe he is the senior director in the Office of Teaching and Learning, the official title, and focuses on a number of areas, including a lot of work at the high school level as well. Kyle, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Kyle Williams. I'm the Brookline High School Athletic Director.
Awesome. And welcome to I think this is the first time you're joining us for a curriculum subcommittee meeting, so welcome. We're going to have a presentation on BHS athletics, and I think it'll be really informational, hopefully, for many people, especially if you have not gone through athletics with us previously. And Kyle, this is your first year in this particular role, but you have been at the public schools of Brookline prior to this, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've been the assistant athletic director, and I've taught at Baker and Lawrence. And I've coached baseball and soccer, both at the high school and around town.
Okay, excellent. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
After we have BHS athletics, we are going to get an update on some of our reviews and where that's at. We'll talk with Leslie, this will be the final subcommittee meeting with Leslie Ryan Miller with us as our Deputy Superintendent of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And then we can address any new business as well. So, Michelle's on, she's off. Leslie's here. Let's see if we can, Kyle will be presenting, I think, the body of the work, but Leslie, did you want to say any words before Kyle presents?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Am I moving slowly?
A little bit, but we can hear you in real time.
Okay. All right. I'm going to just go with it. There's something up with our technology here, so we'll just work with it. So hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Ryan Miller, Deputy Superintendent in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Sorry for the delay, tech issues. And Kyle and Kyle will do really the heavy lift, but I'll jump in and just support his presentation. And I just want to give a little bit of context. So as you said, Jen, Kyle is new in the role, and we thought that this was a really good time to present information about our athletics program, both the strengths of the program as well as some areas for growth. I think it's been really enlightening to have someone new into the position who also came into the role already having some Brookline context and also a lot of experience in athletics. So Kyle's been able to come in and I think see some things that maybe haven't been as easily seen prior to him entering the role. So there's a lot of strengths that we want to share as well as some areas for growth. And I think one of the things that you'll notice is that some items play double duty. They're both strengths, but they also can present particular challenges to the organization in certain ways. And so we'll walk through that. And then, full transparency, as we're going to talk about reviews later on in the presentation, we really do believe that athletics is an area that also needs a review. And so we'll give, again, some context for that ask, but I think we just have a lot of programs that have not gone through program review. And when you have transitions or new people entering the role, it seems like a good time to get a great sense of what's working, what's not, and what we need to pay closer attention to. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen. I think my screen sharing is disabled. Robin, can I have privileges to share? Oh, can you share, Michelle?
Yeah, I can share. Yeah.
Oh, do you mind sharing?
No. Leslie, you should be able to now. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. It's all good.
Do you want me to?
Do you mind, Michelle? Okay.
Oops, I just have to get it. Where I can get to the-
That may help with because my internet is so weird.
And 1 second.
Okay, Michelle's
There.
just pulling up the presentation.
Sorry, I was watching Michelle talk, but in hearing her, and then she was muted, and then I realized that your volume was on, and I was just trying to figure it out because Gabe
was
was
happening
before and we couldn't hear him. And so Gabe, are you able to communicate with us now if you needed to interject?
I should be all set now.
Yes, you sound great. Okay, thank you.
You're good to go.
Tell me when to switch.
All right. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, Michelle. So in this, just even before we jump in with athletics, just our agenda for today. Jen, have we already approved the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes, we did. And I did sort of just a brief preview of what items we'll be covering as topics today. And I think we're ready.
All right. So we can go to the next slide. All right. Go to the next one too, Michelle. All right. And I will turn it over to Kyle. And Kyle, you want to start with just our program strengths?
Sure thing.
Gabe may also want to jump in as he's been working with the high school and also been working pretty closely with Kyle. So he may interject at some points also. Thanks, Kyle.
First, I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear from me today and to learn a little bit about athletics at the high school. It's something I care deeply about and have been involved with for probably 12 years now, professionally. Our strengths as a program come from just about every student that wants to engage in athletics can find a place to engage. We have a broad array of offerings at different skill levels. So if you're a novice, something like ultimate disc or fencing might be an option. If you are someone who is interested in a sport that's a lower commitment, maybe squash is an option because it's 3 days a week and not right after school. Anyway, we have a broad level of offerings. We have 43 sports and 92 different teams. With that comes some challenges, but I'm going to stick with the strengths for now. We are able to grow our programs in such a way that it doesn't impact our current facilities. I started, it was the assistant athletic director working under Pete Rittenberg in 2013-14 and started tracking some of our participation data. And our participation data since then, so since 13-14, has grown between 22 and 25%. So an increase of about 300 to 350 students. Just looking in the winter season, that participation has actually grown by 50%, 48%, which we're really proud of. Because especially in the winter season where students don't necessarily have other ways of getting active on their own, whether it was with family and friends, we can provide this formal option, have really grown our offerings. And also grown our offerings of non-traditional sports, adding fencing and squash in the winter and ultimate in the spring. Across a typical year or across this year, we're estimating that we'll have 1,200 students who will participate in about 1,700 athletic seasons. 300 of those students will participate in 2 sports and 105 of them will participate in 3. We are also proud of the 300 or 405 students who play multiple sports. We see a real value from students who play 2 or more sports in the way that they develop physically, social, emotionally, and also the way that they can engage in different roles in different sports with different coaching styles. We think it really gives them a fuller athletic experience. This next bullet point is an interesting one, that the athletic department is able to provide wellness credit to, this year, we think between 750 and 800 students. So instead of taking a wellness course during the academic day, students can use their sport for credit in the afternoon. And you can see the yearly averages across those 3-year periods. So 2013 to 16 was 630 students. That grew to 741 students between 16 and 19. And we anticipate it will continue to grow as our athletic enrollment has grown. With a growing enrollment, with increases in sports and teams, we've also increased our numbers of competitions or meets. We provide about 1,125 events for our students to compete in each year. And our students travel on 375 buses all around the state of Massachusetts and sometimes beyond. One other program strength is that we've really utilized creative partnerships with Brookline Recreation, with area private schools, with local colleges and universities to maximize our participation numbers while not having had increases in facility capacity here at the high school or around town. And so being able to get creative and do it in such a way that we end up with 70% of our programs that are off campus. And as Leslie had mentioned, these strengths also become areas for growth or challenges in our programs as well. As you can imagine, having 70% of our 1,200 students participating off campus presents, and our 120 coaches presents some serious supervision and evaluation challenges. Leslie, did you want to dive right into areas for growth, or do you want to stick for questions on that last one?
Sure. How does the committee feel? Do you want, what, let's go through maybe the entire presentation and save questions for the end. How's that feel?
Sounds good to me. Areas for growth and focus. I was actually hoping Helen Charlepsky would be on here because she'd have a little bit more of the backstory than I do. I came through Brookline High School, graduating in 2005, and have coached since 2006 or worked in the athletic department. And across that time, we haven't had much structural change to that would be in line with our growth of 20 to 25% participation. We have actually seen a reduction in athletic training staff, reduction in FTEs for administrative assistants, and a growth in challenges beyond just participants. We have complexities in facilities and increased complexities of just youth sports in general. To anyone who reads the newspaper and is aware of the various stories and challenges that are presented in youth sports. Additionally, coming back into this role this fall, and it's something I experienced in the past, but I've had multiple conversations with families, some I knew from Baker, so they reached out, but some just reaching out, hoping that their student could find a sense of belonging here at the high school, but not have the commitment level of an interscholastic sport. And so one of the areas for improvement here at the high school is our club and intramural offerings, where it's a lower commitment in terms of days, in terms of hours, certainly in terms of cost. And also in terms of skill. I think our programs are such that we have such high demand that it's hard to create programming that if you didn't play soccer since third grade, it might be hard to play soccer here at the high school, but you might love soccer and you might like to play it once or twice a week. That type of experience isn't something that we are structured to provide. We are more structured as an interscholastic high school athletic department. We do have shared use agreements with Recreation Adult Ed, BU, Northeastern, Windsor, a few others. And those agreements are wonderful in that they give us access to certain types of facilities like squash courts, or at Northeastern, a stadium with lights. But they also introduce some serious complexities. Northeastern this fall, we ended up not having a home football game, our home opener. We weren't able to play. We had to travel to Oliver Ames, which is a bit of a trek, instead of hosting at home because Northeastern couldn't accommodate us on that weekend. The shared use agreements also add a level of complexity to scheduling that doesn't exist elsewhere. The previous 3 years I was in Wellesley, and they have a ice hockey rink in town. And so to schedule the ice hockey time, the athletic director at the beginning of the season picks up the phone and says, "Hey, do we have the same time this year?" And they say, "Yes." And that's actually our arrangement with Lars Anderson, which is its own issue in terms of the ice quality there. But the experience for me here at Brookline, both previously and then again this year, was that we spend about 40 staff hours trying to organize hockey schedules for 4 to 6 teams across 6 to 8 rinks. And so while we are happy to have a pilot agreement with BU, so we get 40 free hours over there, the complexity involved presents challenges here in Brookline that don't exist in a community like Wellesley. So when we look at staffing structure, it's important to understand how the facilities and the 70% of students participating off campus impact that structure. Also coming back in, there are policies and procedures that are absent here in Brookline that would really assist in the administration of athletics. I find myself dealing with situations on a one-by-one basis instead of having clarity around, say, fundraising or hiring of volunteer assistants or supervision and evaluation. There's an absence of those things, and I'm happy to engage in work, but I understand that my perspective and understanding of athletics in Brookline is only one, and I want to make sure that the perspectives of this group and of the school community and the Brookline community are reflected in our policies and procedures as we build them out. The student activities accounts and challenges with online payments is an important one. I just was going through some data about online payments, and we had it for 3 years. I don't remember the actual years off the top of my head. I apologize, but in those 3 years, we were able to collect 85% of our user fees. So for those of you who don't know, we charge $300 per sport per season for students to participate in athletics. So with online payments, we were able to collect 85%. And without online payments, we were only able to collect 75% of our user fees. That 10% difference represents about $50,000 of a revenue gap that we could certainly use in terms of day-to-day management of the department. So online payments is something we'd really like to bring on with athletics. Recruitment and retention. I mentioned earlier, we have an unfilled sports medicine position. One of those positions has been a stipend, which we are actually able to fill this winter. But the other one was a partnership that was with a local hospital. It's been with a few hospitals over the life of that position. I think most recently it was with Brigham, I believe, and then Children's before that. And the way that worked was we as a district would send, I think at the time it was about $22,000 to the hospital, and the hospital would provide athletic training, an assistant. They would provide one of their full-time employees who they provide benefits to would come over for about 15 to 20 hours a week and support our 1,200 students and make sure that we were covered from liability, but also providing a healthy and safe and equitable experience for our students. And then on the coaching front, I was really concerned going into this fall and winter, that we had 3 positions that remained without applicants going into the week of the season. Not only that, but I had 4 candidates either turn down a position because there wasn't enough, the stipend was not high enough, or take a stipend and take a pay cut of up to $1,200, I think was the most. And that represents about 30% of the salary. So it's just a coach moved from another district, took a 30% pay cut to work here in Brookline. And that is just represents that we need to, or I would really appreciate the opportunity to take a look at how we recruit and retain our coaches and staff. Those coaches and staff make up about 120 stipended positions. There are probably a few volunteer positions on top of that number. And those 120, again, are spread out throughout all of Brookline and parts of Boston, with 70% of them being off-site. I am the only Unit B employee capable of supervising and evaluating those 120 coaches. We already mentioned the wellness credit. One thing to note about that is that students also pay for that credit. So the 750 students who are not taking wellness this year, the district won't have to, there are a couple pieces to that. The district won't have to provide FTEs to provide wellness courses for them. And I was talking to Hal Mason about what that looks like in terms of scheduling. And one of the big benefits to our sports credit pieces is that those students can enroll in other courses that can really enhance their education. So they can take a second science, or they can take a different elective if they're on a career track, or they just have significantly more flexibility in their schedule because they're utilizing the afternoon to get their wellness credit. So that's an opportunity that athletics is providing. It also represents a savings and revenue generation on top of that. The last piece is transportation. Our transportation costs are set by the district. They're built into our contract with Eastern Bus Company. They go up, this contract, they're going up $10 a year, 150 to 160, 160 to 170. Just looking at that same timeline from 13-14 to last year, 13-14, our average bus cost $358. And last year, our average bus cost $670. My understanding of the budget is both in-depth and limited at the same time. But I know that the budget hasn't been adjusted to reflect specifically that. We've been creative as a district in our purchasing of vans when Newbury College closed. We were able to bring in vans, 14 passenger vans from there. So we have 3 of those now. The benefit of those is we have a lot more flexibility and control. The downside is that they are less expensive because the management of those vehicles shifted from Eastern Bus Company to Brookline High School Athletics, to Kelly McDermott, and to our DPW department. So yes, there's a savings, but it's a savings on top of staff that is already stretched pretty thin. So those are some of the areas for growth and focus. I think some things that aren't mentioned here is that are sort of more enhancements and aspirational are the ability to add to student experiences, leadership development, add things like unified sports. So we have some positive areas for growth as well. I hope I don't come off as negative or complaining.
Great. Next slide.
Yeah. So go ahead, Leslie.
No. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, I was just going to say that the process here, and I'm very thankful to be able to tell this story, because I think to get community buy-in, to get community excited about athletics, the ability to iterate and to improve upon ourselves is really important. And in order to do that, I'm asking for your support to think about our program and to evaluate and plan strategically to say, what are we doing well? What could we be doing better? How does it compare to surrounding communities? So I would hope that we could do a thorough budget review, really dive into some underlying data and what the cost drivers are. And then that review would really have a high impact. I think it was, Dr. Bob who would talk about high school athletics being the front porch of the school. And it has an impact on 1,200 students. They're participating in 1,700 seasons, 90 different teams. And they're representing our community when other communities travel here and when we travel to other communities. It really does tell the story of Brookline High School, because our 1,200 students are representative of our 2,000 student body. So again, we're hoping to be able to provide a picture of what we offer, how it's offered, whom it's offered to, and then the cost associated with that and the fees associated with that.
And I'll just jump in and say, I think one of the things I'm hoping that this presentation highlights is just how complex managing an athletic program can be. So we have to think about the facilities, we have to think about transportation, the scheduling of the different facilities as well. And then just looking at the student experience, which is also tied to coach retention. I was actually in another presentation this morning, and they were talking about the social emotional support that coaches provide when children are in activities that they choose, in courses that they choose, that many times the adults that lead those programs become the trusted adult of students. And so I would see that being the case for many of our coaches and supporting support staff. And so, given that there is some level of which this is happening across the nation, right? Like an issue with just finding coaches and the retention of coaches. It's just something we have to be mindful of, especially because we run a very large program. And so what that means for our students. So again, there's just many facets to the work. And I think because we were in the enviable spot of having someone in the role when Pete Rittenberg was in the role for a good amount of time, that consistency was certainly helpful. And then also on the other side, we just haven't explored or looked in depthly at the program in some time. And so I think it's time to do that. Michelle, could you just stop sharing and then we can open it up for questions and have more of a discussion.
Do folks have questions? Okay, I see Suzanne. I'm going to wait. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to let Suzanne and then Stephen go, and then I'll come back and see what doesn't.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kyle, for the presentation. I actually kind of have a lot of questions, but I think I'll just start kind of at the very basics. So if a student is in a sport for a season, does that give them a full credit for wellness, or is that a half credit for wellness?
Neither of those. They get a quarter credit for wellness. They get a year's worth of credit for wellness, essentially.
I think
you can correct me. I know that's not the right language, but
no, that it's a quarter credit from a graduation and transcript standpoint. I think the key is that students are required to do physical education every year. Okay. And so it counts as doing physical education for the year as well.
So one sport counts as one sport for one season counts as a full year credit.
Correct, but it's a quarter of a credit on their transcript.
Right, because they only get one credit for the 4 years. I should know this.
No, so it's understandable that it takes a minute. So like a standard full year course that meets every day is a 1 credit course, right? They get 1 credit for the year. A semester class then is a half a credit. Right. Our wellness classes typically they don't meet every day. Okay. And so most of our wellness classes, yoga, rock climbing, more typical team sports, those are actually quarter credit classes. So students aren't meeting with those every day. And so a single sport season counts the same as taking 1 wellness course.
So so could they conceivably not take wellness for the 4 years if they're on a sports team every year? How do they get the wellness content?
Yeah, so the freshman year, all freshman students are required to take the wellness course. They cannot use this sports credit contract or option. Sophomore, junior, and senior year, students can utilize sports for their wellness credit. And so they are not getting they are relying on their sport for all of their wellness content.
Okay. And then, so is attendance taken, or how is a student accountable for those hours?
Yep. Attendance is generally taken, and each sport, because they have different requirements, different meeting numbers, different hours, sets their own requirement for what credit looks like in their sport. So there are certainly students who participate in the season and do not end up receiving the credit, and then have to sign up for a wellness course because they didn't fulfill their obligations to the sport.
Okay. And is that kind of contract done at the beginning of the year? Or?
There is a sports contract, and this is separate from that. So I just want to be careful about the language that we use.
Okay.
Students would sign up for a sport through their guidance counselor, and it shows up on sort of the bottom end of their calendar on their Aspen X2 schedule.
So essentially looks like a course on their schedule. And as Kyle alluded to, right, sometimes students don't show up and they don't receive credit, but also sometimes students are cut from sports that do cuts. And so they may also need to either find a different sport or sign up for a wellness class. And we have some protections in place to support seniors who may be running into trouble that way.
Okay. But again, what the wellness curriculum, how much wellness do students take besides their ninth grade wellness? Is there wellness courses besides it they're required to take if they're not and it's on a sports team?
So the ninth grade class is the only specific course that is required. Then students need to obtain wellness credit through a variety of means. And DESE does allow this kind of substitution.
And and just one other thought now, if a student is having trouble with the $300 fee for a sport, do we have a means of some kind of aid or scholarship or something for sports? Or
Yep, it's part of the district's financial assistance application.
okay,
Would be covered in the same way that any other fee would be covered.
okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Stephen, did you want to go ahead and I'll go after you?
Sure. I'll just ask a couple of questions. Thanks for that presentation. I didn't know almost any of that. I don't have children at the high school, and I've only been on the school committee a short time, so that was really informative for me. Thanks. Couple of questions. One, you mentioned that you're evaluating 120 coaches, so that seems very difficult. Can you say how you are managing to do that, and how we have done this in the past? Have we had more supervisory positions over this number of coaches, and has that number gone down, or have we somehow done this before?
Well, I'll start by answering that question with some basic information, which is that the coaches are stipended positions on year-to-year contracts, so that there has not been formal evaluations done of those individuals in my time in Brookline, my experience in Brookline. There are 120 adults working with our kids for the same amount of time. So the kids who are on an athletic team for one season will be with that adult for the same amount of time that a student is with their English teacher or their math teacher across the course of a year. So the impact on students is immense. In addition to what Leslie was saying in terms of students choosing to engage in an activity and having the depth of relationship that can be fruitful from that. In terms of supervision and evaluation, I would say that there is not a formal method in place for doing that for one individual across 120 people. There have also not been more than one individual doing that work in my experience in Brookline. There are some other limitations that are layered on top of that the athletic director or an administrator need to be at certain events in the afternoons, which limits my ability to be at other events. I can't be in two places at once. So that is a little bit of information that doesn't directly answer your question. So I'm happy to have a follow-up.
No, it does. I mean, I appreciate you taking the initiative to do this work. Certainly don't want my questions to seem like I'm penalizing you for doing the work.
No.
I'm just trying to get a better sense of what the stakes are for these evaluations and what we could accomplish with these evaluations. And if you have any recommendations for how we could strengthen professional development for these stipended coaches with the staffing structure we currently have. Obviously, a recommendation is to improve our staffing structure, but if there are any recommendations you have around the current staffing structure.
Yeah, we've started to engage in some professional development this year that we hadn't done in years past. We've gone to summits, one at TD Garden about addressing hate and bias in sports. We had a mental health literacy for coaches training earlier in the year. But these are sort of opt-in moments for coaches, opportunities to better themselves in their practice. Our coaches are similarly stretched thin. This is not a primary job for them. This is secondary or even tertiary work for them. And when they're in their season, which is the timeline that we're hiring them for, it's a 10-week, 14-week stipended position. They are working with our students probably for 20-ish hours a week. And so what I've found in my experience working in athletics is that it is difficult to find pockets of extra time to layer on the types of professional development and support and growth that we do for our educators, our full-time educators here in Brookline. And so that actually does create some mismatched expectations of our coaches. They expect our coaches, families, community members, students expect our coaches to have the expertise and training that our professional educators do. And that's often not the case, even though aspirationally we'd love to get there.
I see. My other question for you is, you mentioned the U.S. and policy recommendations for us, and you gave us an example. Do you have any other examples that you want to highlight for us? Because that's an area that we do have the power to make some recommendations and changes.
Yeah, I don't have a large list off the top of my head. Transportation policy needs some work coming out of COVID in particular, because there was tremendous flexibility built in based off of people's comfort level, based off of spacing on buses and availability. While we are past some of those requirements of COVID, we still are in an environment where it's very difficult to find buses and bus drivers. So we run into cancellations, postponements due to a lack of transportation. So clarity around who can transport, whom can students drive themselves, can parents carpool with, our kids can carpool with someone else's parents, and what does that permission look like? Is there a form A, B, and C for various levels of that? Those are things that some of them exist in the athletic handbook and haven't been revisited both before COVID, during COVID, or after. It's been a long time. So what I've discovered is that a lot of our policies are nice in theory and in practice don't meet the reality of the moment.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start by following up on, I think, Stephen's second question about policy. So I have a couple, no, I'm going to back up. So one, I think we need a review. So I support the idea of doing an athletics review. It's something that I actually brought up, I think, in finance subcommittee when I was first on the subcommittee, in order to understand the dynamic. There's so much going on with 43 sports and 92 teams. That's very complex. And and as a brand new school committee member, I was sort of just trying to understand whether or not we were meeting the needs of students, how many teams should we have in certain areas, how many sports can we offer? It's just very, very complex. There's scheduling, there's locations, lack of access to facilities. It seems to me that you need some support, not only with supervision, but with scheduling. It seems like there's a greater need. So I think that a review would help us to really understand the finance and policy side of this from a school committee perspective, but there's also a huge benefit to the district in understanding where our athletics program is and where we need to take it. So I'll just sort of say, I think it's a good idea. I have a question around that. What are the plans for, where does the district's, how would we run this? Do we have funding for it? What are sort of the next steps of a review is one area. And then I had just a couple of comments and questions. I do have some concerns, and perhaps we would get more of this data about the wellness piece for 10, 11th, and 12th graders, which we've also in sort of curriculum conversations talked about looking at our wellness program and what we offer. So there's some real intersection here, I think, of two different pieces. And I'm wondering how coaches are, if students are getting athletic credit, so like an opt-out, and getting wellness credit for an athletic sport, how are they getting access to some of the wellness pieces that students who are not opting into the athletics or opting out of the wellness, how are they getting that piece, sort of general wellness, stress management, issues like consent? Like there's a whole other piece other than the sport specific pieces. And so I'm wondering how students are accessing that, especially knowing that coaches are stipended and for a very specific set of time in which truly their focus is their sport and the students in front of them. So I'm just wondering how that will work together. I'm concerned about a caseload of 120 people to supervise. That's a lot. I'm wondering what happened. Could you tell us what happened to the agreement with the hospitals about the sports medicine position? What happened with that partnership, if you know? And I'm just wondering if there's a possibility that we could renew some of that, or if that, I'm just concerned. I hear the concern that we have unfilled sports medicine positions, which we clearly need. And so I was like, well, that's great that we had that partnership. Do you know what happened with that partnership Kyle, that we no longer have that?
Specifically, the individual that was filling that role went on to other professional obligations or interests. And so I think the contract and the role were unique in such a way that when one individual leaves, it was difficult to fill that position. And then the complexities of dealing with multiple departments at a hospital and multiple departments in a school district or municipality, those also proved probably too challenging in the past. I think it's probably 6 or 7 years now that we haven't had that position. I wasn't involved in the negotiations or discussions around that, so it's difficult to say. I also know that the athletic training field is one where there's incredible scarcity right now of employees. So the arrangement before at that dollar amount and with the flexibility in the schedule on the hospital's employee may not be appealing to the individual or the hospital. I do know that based on our enrollment and how we compare to other districts, like I think Watertown provides an athletic trainer at each athletic event. Right now, we're lucky if we can cover one of our 2 or 3 varsity events that day. And that means we're not covering the campus, that because most of our varsity athletic events are off campus, sometimes, 4 miles away up at Skyline or on Wednesdays and Saturdays hockey over at BU. So that is there are many ways districts do it. They can partner with the hospital, they can partner with a PT program, they can pay full-time employees, and that's actually what our district did move to. I think our head athletic trainer used to be through a contract as well. And then Alex Jazik, who is our current athletic trainer, is now a 1.0 unaligned employee as the head athletic trainer. And I think some of that was to try to secure him as an individual in this work, recognizing how valuable he is in his abilities, but also just having someone with consistency there and not subject to the complexity of a relationship with the hospital. I think that is to say, I think there are opportunities going forward to re-engage with hospitals and other medical providers. And to be frank, our district turnover has limited our ability to do that as well, because that's work that has been done by administration and finance in the past. Mary Ellen tried to take up that work, and I didn't get a chance to engage with that work this year.
This is really helpful. I mean, I don't know where other subcommittee members are. I mean, I personally would support a review. I'm wondering, perhaps maybe, Suzanne wants to speak, but I'm wondering if the district has some ideas on what those next steps might be, but perhaps maybe Suzanne and Stephen want to weigh in on sort of where they fall with the review. Suzanne?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I would support a review. I just, going back, I think, to what Stephen and then you've talked about, Jennifer, I am concerned a little bit about the supervision of our coaches. There's just so much opportunity for things not going well if they have no oversight, no contact, if the students don't know who they can go to. I just really think we need to include that in the review. How are our coaches trained, and how do they get some kind of supervision, or certainly time with a head coach, or and then with the athletic director, with you, Kyle. It just feels like, you pull them off the street, and I know you Corey them, I'm sure, but there's so much more to being a coach than just the Corey. And so I just think we owe it to our families and students to make sure that just as our teachers, are evaluated and supervised, somehow our coaches need to have some kind of evaluation and supervision.
I will share, just to jump in real quick, that our coaches go through a full hiring process, Corey, fingerprinting, just like any other employee, the trainings, an in-person meeting. It's a very comprehensive process for, like, say, a freshman coach who's making $3,000 across 12 weeks of work. It is burdensome for them, and it's important that they go through that. So there's the balance there. I'll also share that some other districts provide 2 stipends, so a head coach and an assistant coach. So at the very least, you have 2 adults present with students at most of the time. And so that helps with some of the liability, some of the concerns around having one individual with a significant amount of influence and power with 20 to 30 individual students. So it's not supervision in a traditional Unit B sense, but it is support and supervision in a different sense.
Thank you.
Jennifer, I'm happy to respond to your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Stephen, I was just going to say, in response to what you were saying, Suzanne, I think a review could provide some feedback as to what comparable districts are doing. But I also think in the more immediate, Kyle, Gabe, and Anthony and I have had some very preliminary talks about getting the department some more support even for next year to support with the supervision and evaluation of coaches. So I know that, and a number of other things. I think that it's something we don't necessarily want to wait on. And I don't want to get ahead of things, because I still haven't yet shared this with Dr. Guillory, but we did want to present a case for some, at least a 1.0 FTE to support the department as maybe an assistant athletic director, or we really would need to look at what the right title and job would be, but looking to get some more help in the immediate, even prior to a review. And in many ways, it's a good problem to have, right? We need the help because our programming is really robust. And so that's the really positive part of it. And again, I think prior to Kyle coming on, there was someone in the role who had done the job for a long period of time. And when that happens, you don't really have a bird's eye view, you're just in it. And so I think now Kyle coming in and being able to have that bird's eye view, we're seeing some places where we could really support the department in the work of the department.
Stephen?
I think I support what Leslie said. If there's anything that our conversation around literacy has educated me on over the past 6 months, I think it's the amount of resources required and preparation required for a real review. So I think at the least, it's clear that the supervision issue is a strong rationale for considering the staffing structure with or without a review. And I think Leslie's suggestion of considering at the very least what the objectives of a review would be before prioritizing a review would be wise. But I would love, I don't have, institutional memory. I'm being relatively new to paying attention to these issues at all. I don't know what's been recently reviewed and what are likely to be on deck as priorities for future reviews also. So I don't know what it would be competing with also, but it does seem something that would be a rich topic for studying in depth. So I agree with you, Jennifer, at the very least on that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's some things that if we could make movement on in the immediate, and then, the review might, give us more information, more input about whether or not that's enough or in the right structure. But I do think there are some things that soon. I think we should do that. And while looking for a way to do a really in-depth review, because there were a couple of things that Kyle mentioned, like that are more in our purview directly. For example, policy subcommittee could review and update policies, but I'm not really sure if we should be doing that before or after a review. So, it seems like after a review makes most sense, but if there are some immediate things, I don't know. So there's an area of policy that we can really be supportive of, and then obviously finance, student activity account challenges, online collections. That seems like something we don't necessarily need to wait for a review to do. So there may be areas where curriculum and finance can have conversations together in a joint subcommittee meeting to address some of these concerns. The same with policy. We could do joint curriculum and policy subcommittees when we're at that point. So I want to sort of circle back to what are the thoughts around what a review might look like, a timeline, what are the next steps for budget, unless other members have comments or questions. Okay, so do we have any ideas about what the next steps would be on the district side?
Yeah, and this is it's actually a good segue into the next part of our presentation, which we don't have to go there yet, but we are going to talk about the reviews that are underway, the current process, what we've learned from some reviews that we've done this year, and what's on deck. And so, we haven't talked a lot about the funding for this particular review. We would need to really think about that. It could be the general fund. We could also look at our federal grants. From my perspective, the reviews are really ripe for being funded through grant opportunities because it's one-time funding. And so I think it would be a good use of particular grant funds that meet the needs that we're outlining. So we would think about that. We could also make a request in the budget, the materials and salary portion, not salary, but the materials portion of the budget process. We may be a little late for that. So it's just going to take some conversations. We'll have to think about where the funding could come from. But the first step is really to figure out what we want from a review and then write a really thorough RFP. Then we would put it out to bid. And actually, if it's not over $50,000, it may not need a bid, but what we found is that the RFP process has been really helpful in us kind of coming together to think about, okay, what do we want from this review? What questions do we want answered? So I think it's just a good process to go through. And then it's also really helpful to see what you get back from folks before you select somebody. Prices really vary. And the background of the folks who conduct the reviews, that really varies. So we want someone that, would have a strong skill set and know the landscape of athletics nationally, quite frankly. So it'd be interesting to see what we get back. So the first two steps would be, one, identify the funding source, and then secondly, work on an RFP that we could get out and then see what we get back.
That's really helpful. And I know that I'm sure will be part of the RFP process, or sort of what kinds of questions we have and what we want. But I think one piece that I'm hearing is, what's happening on the faculty staffing side, but also what is it that students want and need from our program? And are we meeting the needs of students, the children that are in front of us? So I'd love to get input from students as part of the review process, as well as families and meeting their needs. There's a whole bunch of, you mentioned, Kyle, transportation issues that need to be, facility issues that we need to think about. How many, the number of sports, the number of teams, our ability to hire and staff positions. So there's a lot going on, and I think it is a good time for us to start to tackle this work. And really focusing I just wanted to sort of throw that student and parent piece out there too.
Yeah. And I see that as really important, actually. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but having that clarity from the community, student and family side about what we're offering, why and how would get ahead of a lot of the challenges that I face and our coaches face and have to manage on a day, and Anthony has to face a lot of times, because there is misaligned or mismatched expectations about what an athletic director does, what a coach does, how many levels of soccer we're going to offer, et cetera. And so this process is really valuable. And just as a community saying, we haven't done this in 20 plus years. What do we want to offer as a community, and why and how?
I think it's great. I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and, that Kyle, that you're, and Leslie and Gabe and Anthony and Hal bringing this up forward to us so that we can start to think about this in our budgeting process, our policies, and then sort of this piece of our curriculum and how it fits in with the experience. And so, like, my mind goes on to the high school experience, and the intramural experience that you sort of started talking about, Kyle, the interest that I think that there are among students and families who may not, who may get cut from a sport or are looking for different areas. And I love that we offer a huge range. And I think we just need to gather some more information about what's working well for us and where we need to grow. And, I think that there's a lot of interest in your intramural sports. And then I also am interested in our middle school review and wondering how intramurals will play a part in our middle school program, because we have a unique K-8 a structure, and that it provides a different experience, I think, right now than a traditional middle school model might, where you have lots of middle school students and educators all together in one building. So we just have some different challenges that I think we need to think about, but that's part of a feeder pattern, I think, for our high school athletics as well. So I'm really interested in continuing to have this conversation. So, I see Anthony has his hand up. Anthony, you want to join in?
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, members of the curriculum subcommittee. I can be brief, but want to just express my full support for Kyle. He's the right person at the right time to lead this department, and part of our candid process in interviewing him and offering him the job, Kyle made clear we need to look carefully at our program. Yes, it's large. It has many wonderful teams, programs, and supports, and it needs a careful look as we grapple with facility issues, access issues, what you all have talked about. So I'm grateful for this group, the curriculum subcommittee members, particularly grateful to Leslie and Gabe for very much engaging, as Leslie alluded to, many conversations with Kyle about our athletic department. So I love the idea of a review. I love the idea of student and family feedback. And I think the challenge that we need to tackle now, and I would have named as one of two beyond broad program review, is supervision and evaluation of coaches. And so I appreciate that there may be some support to move in that direction, to look at the structure of athletics, even though we need a deeper review. So most of all, thank you for asking good questions. And I'm sorry that I was late. I was meeting with the department longer than I imagined.
It's all good, Anthony. We're glad you're here, you and Hal.
Do members of the subcommittee have any other questions at this point? I mean, I think we have lingering questions, but are there any additional comments or questions before we move on to the next agenda item? Suzanne?
Yeah, not a question so much, Jennifer, just, thinking about when we might want this to be presented to the whole school committee. It feels like it's bigger than just us. And if there are some implications for the budget, even in short term, meaning next year, now is the time to think about that. So if we need additional support for Kyle, or, especially if it's a staffing position that's going to be in the budget, if we need that for next year, we have to think about that soon. And so anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I think there's some sense of urgency to provide what we might need for next year, even before a full review is done, if there is such a need for that.
Yeah, I think everyone on this call is in agreement. I'm going to reach out to Dr. Guillory, actually after this meeting, just to confirm. We'll get ahead. We're just now entering into the salary and personnel portion of the budget phase, so we're right on time. So I want to make sure that he is up to date on the ask and the why, the rationale. And I think it's very feasible that we can get the athletics department some immediate help starting next year.
And it's certainly on my radar as like one of the key things. And I know Kyle won't let me forget about it.
Yeah, and what was the other thing you were asking, Suzanne, was about when this should go to full committee. And so I think I can discuss what we've talked about here in the next curriculum subcommittee report to the full committee. But I'm just wondering what is the right timing, and we can think about this further to involve full school committee. I think it's important that they know, that we're beginning to enter this work, but I don't know if we should do that before or after the RFP process begins or where we are. So, we can follow up on that piece about when we can get onto the docket for full committee, just to have members have an understanding as we do about the importance of doing this work right now. Okay, so seeing no other questions, thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us. And as we always say in our meetings, you're welcome to stay for the entire meeting, but you're also welcome to begin your evening. Thank you for spending this time this evening with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all your hard work for the district and our students.
Thank you. It was nice to see and meet you, and I really do appreciate the time. So thank you.
Yeah, great job. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony and Hal, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is a sort of an update on current reviews that are underway in the public schools of Brookline, so that we can sort of have some big overview of where we're at and where we're heading.
Yeah. So Michelle, do you mind sharing your screen? So this actually, the athletics presentation is a great segue into the next piece. Earlier in the year, I remember Andy Liu was on one of the calls and asked, I just don't understand, what reviews are we doing? What's the timeline? What's coming up? And so that's really the impetus for this conversation. We wanted to talk about several things. We wanted to talk about the process of the past, some things we've learned as we've engaged in reviews that we think make the reviews more thorough and more manageable. And then talk about just the trajectory for reviews, what we've done thus far with this new administration, with myself, since Dr. Guillory's come on, myself, Gabe, and Michelle in the role. And do you need some, is it not sharing?
To do it, Mike.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Uh-oh, did it kick Michelle off?
Yes.
It might have. Okay, Michelle's coming back. So I might
have this
share my screen.
Yeah.
So we wanted to just talk about the reviews that have already been underway more recently, where they are, and then what we're looking to do in the future.
Leslie,
Yes.
before you start, do you think you can define a review? So I don't need like a philosophical discussion. It's like a loose definition of what a review is.
Sure. So I think that's a good question. We actually have a slide that speaks to that.
I'll be patient.
So, I will say this though, Stephen, I think there are really broad definitions of reviews. And one of the things that I've even learned since I got into this role are the various ways that we can conduct reviews. So for instance, when we think about the new teacher center review of our social studies curriculum in grades 6 through 12, that's really a materials review. So there's a process for thinking about and looking at our materials, but then there's also times we actually want to look at our full program and look at our pedagogy. And so I think there's various ways that we can conduct reviews. So I think your question is a really good one. All right, no problem. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is the 4 phases of Public Schools of Brookline program review process that have been used prior to, let's say, last year. So how program reviews typically happened was they were conducted by someone in the Office of Teaching and Learning prior to us making changes to the senior director roles, there was a senior director of programming, and that person really facilitated and led curriculum reviews or program reviews. The last program review that was led by a senior director in this office was the math review. And that got completed in 2020. Was it during the pandemic?
It was during the pandemic.
It was during the pandemic. That's what I thought. And so these were the 4 steps that were integrated into all of the program reviews. So the first one was around study and vision. And I won't read these, I'll just, it's here on the screen. The next piece was a plan. So thinking about the necessary budget, how do we define success, et cetera. Then the implementation, and the monitoring of the implementation of whatever plan was decided around the program review, and then the actual review, the process, and then an analysis of the results. As you can imagine, this is a really, it's robust and takes a lot of time. And I think that one of the things that we found was that when we work with consultants, a couple of things happen. One, there's more capacity for the review. So the review can take place in a more timely manner. Also, I just lost my train of thought. More capacity. And Gabe and Michelle, feel free to jump in. You're also free of bias, right? So if someone in the organization who already deeply knows the programming is facilitating the reviews, there's always going to be some amount of bias because you're already familiar with the people in the program. Versus when you have an outside consultant, the hope is that they're free of that bias. And additionally, you can select someone to conduct the review who has expertise in a particular area. So I think a great example of that, and actually you want to go to the next slide? Perfect. I think a great example of that is actually the middle school review. And I'm actually going to ask Gabe to jump in, which is some of his feedback. But I will say that the RFP process for the middle school review was absolutely enlightening. I mean, it was incredible to see. How many folks do we have, Gabe? Do we have 5?
How many applicants?
Applicants, yeah. I can't.
It was only 3 or 4.
Oh, 3 or 4. Okay. But the way that the various organizations wanted to approach the review was really interesting. The skill set they brought, it really varied. And then the cost, I mean, we had such a variance in cost. It was incredible. And so ultimately we went with New Solutions, which I think was an absolutely fantastic choice, because this is the work that they do every day. They look at middle schools, they look at all different kinds of schools, they look at scheduling, and that's a big component of the middle school review. So I think when we look outside the organization and look to hire folks who can support the reviews, we get a much cleaner, thorough review, which is at least what I've found in this time. Gabe, do you want to talk a little bit about just the timeline?
Sure.
Every program review will vary, and the middle school review was one that was a little different from the others. So I think that this just gives you kind of an eye into some of the variance on timeline.
Yeah, and I think a key part of the timeline is related to scale. And so we'll talk about the social studies review a little bit later. It was a much more narrow review, and so it can happen quicker. We're looking at programming and scheduling and staffing across all of our schools, right? All disciplines, all content areas. And so the scale increased quite significantly. Essentially what you see here, though, are similar phases to what Leslie described before. We've titled them a little bit differently. Right, the RFP stage is about figuring out what we want. And then the current stage that we're in, what we're calling discovery for the middle school review, is a fact finding, right? Making sure we have a good accounting of our scheduling, our time on learning, our staffing, our programming at the different schools. And part of the reason we're taking so much time with it is so that we can be thorough. And we got a preliminary kind of high level report from the from New Solutions this morning, actually, and they'll be issuing the full report with all the data and all the analysis in early March. So kind of stay tuned for that regarding the real full deep analysis of everything. But they've gone with a fine-tooth comb over literally every middle school staff member's schedule, right? Like their actual person's schedule, right? And how many sections they're teaching. And it's like Leslie said, the level of depth is impressive. It's not something that I would have been able to do in my capacity as a senior director, just because I have a number of other responsibilities. And they have the research and the expertise. So they're able to say, here's what we see in Brookline, here's how it compares to national research and national trends across a number of relevant items. And so, you know, we also have been able to do an inclusive process with the middle school review. We've conducted nearly 50 focus groups between staff, students, and community members. And we are at a place where we're going to be able to report out on that. And then we want to begin the design phase. So in the previous slide, right, Leslie mentioned, referenced this plan phase, and this kind of lines up with that, right? We want to have just an inclusive process about determining priorities and making choices about what to do next, as we had on the discovery phase. And then we'll do some implementation and be able to review the implementation. And really part of the length too is to make sure the timing lines up with our various budget requests, so that if we make choices that have budget implications, we can have a thorough discussion of that work. And so, you know, this is currently our most robust review. It probably sits in a similar category as the math review, because math was looking at every school across pre-K through 8, or at least K through 8. And so the scope of this is really large, and it takes time to do it with the level of depth and thoroughness that we've been looking for.
Yeah, perfect. Michelle, next slide. Are there any, I should back up. Are there any questions just about anything we shared? Actually, Michelle, can you go back one more time? Sorry. No, this is perfect. One of the things I did want to point out is, if you look, the RFP stage went from September through December. Actually, it went a little bit past December. So I don't want to minimize how much time the RFP process takes. And it's, you know, we're looking to do a literacy review. And so one of the things that we'll start to do is we'll work on the RFP process, but that takes time because you need to, again, really note what are you looking for, be really clear on what the objectives and goals are for the review, what you're hoping the person who does, or the organization that does the review, will bring to the review. Then you have reviewers. Once you send the RFP out, you get bids back. You want to be really thorough in terms of reviewing those proposals that are sent in. So that is a time-consuming part of the review process. And so I just wanted to be, I wanted to be really clear about that piece. Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. So I'm just curious. So in implementation, is that full implementation? Is that pilot implementation? Is that we'll do a little bit and then we'll review and then we'll do everybody? I mean, I'm sure it's different for every review, but what are our thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's sort of intentionally vague at this point.
Okay.
The contract with New Solutions currently only goes through the discovery phase. This is captured from the website. And so our district website has a little bit more description about all of this. And that's intentional, right? We weren't sure how we were going to like working with New Solutions. They've been incredibly flexible and responsive, really above and beyond my expectations. And so one of the steps is, as they wrap up their full report, we get to consider whether we think they're the right partner for the design stage and making some of the choices, right? Implementation could look like a number of things. They're going to offer a number of potential areas of focus, or potential avenues we could explore for making changes to our middle school program. And we get to decide how many of those we can take on at any one time, how we might prioritize those, right? And we want that to be an inclusive, community involved exercise. And so what decisions get made there will then determine what implementation looks like. So we don't want to pre-prescribe that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right, we'll go to the next one, Michelle. So, we've done, since this OTL leadership team started in July of 21, we have a number of reviews underway. And so I know you guys keep hearing this. And so it's good to kind of see it in one place and see what's happening. So we just wanted to walk through some of the review timelines, the funding sources, and who our partners are. So the social studies curriculum review for racial equity and cultural responsiveness, that is underway. That started in April of this year. And we are, and Gabe, correct me if I'm wrong, we are almost done with the first portion, because the first portion was 9 through 12. The second portion will be 6 through 8-ish.
Not quite. They've done the materials review. So looked at our curriculum documents, looked at a number of materials that teachers sent. They've also done classroom visits to nearly all social studies teachers grades 6 through 12. And then the next stage will be focus groups, both with students and community, and actually with staff as well as a survey. So they are in the middle of the process, but it's not divided by grade level.
Yeah, okay. And so the completion date is still up in the air, and there have been, we want to be responsive to those who are participating. So Gary Schiffman is highly involved, Malcolm Cawthorn, because the funding is coming through the METCO program. And then also Greg Porter, who's our K-8 social studies coordinator. And just a lot of things have been going on. And so, for instance, one of the coordinators said, I just need a little more time. And so, we've slowed the process down a little bit to make sure that we are efficient and effective. So completion date is still up in the air, but I think it will be in not too long, but a good amount of work is underway, and already some feedback has been given to the high school team about what was seen on the visits there. So that's been very helpful. And just in reviewing the materials, I know they're in the midst, something went out to high school parents and guardians in the community about feedback. And so I think this is one of the places where having a consultant support this work really helps us do our due diligence in terms of getting community feedback. So Gabe talked about almost 50 focus groups for the middle school review. I went back in my notes. We had over 25 focus groups for the EL review, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the focus groups play a big role in this, and it's just really helpful to have that capacity to do them and do them properly.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, please.
I just want to add one more thing really quickly, because I don't want us to brush over the other benefit of having these external partners help us is that us as full-time staff can continue our regular work, right? So I can continue supporting the curriculum department at the high school or Steps to Success, right? These regular parts of my job while the middle school review continues, right? Greg and Gary can support their departments in social studies while this materials review continues. Teachers can continue to teach and do their job. They don't have to kind of pause that work to do this. And so it's a really huge benefit so that we don't lose track of our day-to-day stuff while we try to do these special projects.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for adding that. The response to intervention child study teams, we just presented on that actually at the last school committee meeting on December 15th. That review is completed. It started in July and we just recently finished. And again, what was great about that was the opportunity to interview math specialists, literacy specialists, teachers, CST leaders, district leaders, school leaders, students, get student feedback. I keep losing my train of thought today. What was I going to say about this? It'll come back to me, I'm sure.
And there were classroom visits.
Yep. Classroom observations. So that's always a key part of the review. And this work was funded through IDEA. So as part of our disproportionality citing, a specific amount of IDEA funds need to be put towards mitigating that disproportionality. And DESE approved the partnership with the New Teacher Center, as well as a review of our child study teams and response to intervention MTSS model as a good starting point to begin thinking about the best ways to mitigate that disproportionality citing. You all heard the findings from the EL review. Dr. Bertha Elena Rojas presented a couple of months ago. This was actually part of a DESE progress monitoring review, which we are obligated to do. And so this was a conversation that Mindy Paulo and I had, she's the director of K-12, our English learner program. And so she was getting all suited up to conduct the review herself. And it just speaks to the point that Gabe made. I'm here thinking she runs this huge department that's growing every day. How are we going to stop that work so that she can conduct this review thoroughly? And so we actually took a different approach, and we used our Title II funds, which DESE also approved, to provide funding to conduct the review. And we got Dr. Rojas to engage in that work, which again, it's really helpful because Dr. Rojas works with English learner programs across the Commonwealth. She's seen so many different models. She knows the law, the related laws. And so to have her from an unbiased perspective give us feedback on our programming, again, was really helpful. So again, that program review started in April and we concluded it in September. Oh, and I should actually say that as a result of that review, we exited the need to complete any reviews for the next, I believe it's 5 years. So that was, I think, a really positive sign that was a good choice to engage in the review the way that we did. I'm not going to spend much time on the middle school review, but did want to cite that we did get approved to use both Title I, Title IV, and IDEA funding to cover that review, which I'd say out of all the reviews, the middle school review is the most expensive. And that makes sense. They're looking at so many things. Just a review alone of our FTE was an incredible amount of time. But I think is going to yield some really helpful information that's going to help us make more informed decisions in the future. Both student-focused decisions and budget decisions, I think, will come out of that work that they've done. More recently, we've engaged with an organization called Partners in Sex Education to take a look at our sex education and health curriculum. And I'm going to ask, I think adolescence is spelled wrong. I'm just looking at that. Sorry. I'm like wanting to go into the PowerPoint and change that right now. But our Intro to Adolescence course is changing. And this is a really sensitive topic. I mean, a lot of you, the school committee members, I know that the policy has come up around how we inform families about what we teach in our sex education curriculum. And with so many changes just on the landscape, this is a place where you want to be really sensitive to the values that people hold, what we're putting in front of children, as every family thinks of this work differently. And so we just want to be really clear in how we're engaging. Michelle, do you want to jump in to talk about what the work is?
Yeah,
Okay.
So we realized that this is going to take us longer than 1 year. We initially set out to look specifically at the Intro to Adolescence curriculum and realized that it's all connected all the way up through the high school curriculum. So we have, as Leslie said, we've partnered with this group, Partners in Sex Education, and the person is local, which has been great. And so a couple of things are happening. They are currently looking at our 5th grade curriculum with the eye. You'll see that this goes for a year and a half. So we're going to add in looking at all of the anything around sex education will be added into this study. They're looking at materials. They are reviewing, this company's reviewing our policy to give feedback to the policy committee. for an update. They are gonna do the work with how we train the teachers and support Carlin in doing that. And they're really being a thought partner with Carlin right now as well to ensure that that our content is delivered in a way that's developmentally sensitive so that we can be cutting edge in the material. And then I think the other thing is they're also reviewing actual materials, things that will go in the library, things that will go in a classroom, what's put in front of students versus what's a support for teachers. And so it's pretty comprehensive right now, that work, and that's just for this year. And then we're going to reevaluate where we're at in the summer so that we can continue the contract.
And then the two reviews that are highlighted in yellow, because they're to be determined, but we're prioritizing them as the next two that we would start, are our ELA program and materials review. And then we were hoping that you guys would desire a athletic program review. So we just put it into existence, and that's another program review that we would really like to engage in. So in terms of the ELA program review, we did write for some funding in Title I, which we did receive, but the funding won't nearly cover the scope of the work. And so we also made a request for the general fund for next year to cover the remaining portion, which we don't know what it will cost, right? But I think we have a sense of what it will cost. And because this spans K-8, it's going to be quite expensive. And so looking at the general fund, looking at Title I, and I would assume that that's going to be both a program and a materials review. So the next step with the ELA program review is the RFP. And so Michelle is going to take the lead on that and get the RFP ready to go. I would think that we would have a RFP ready to be sent out maybe, and you can jump in, Michelle, maybe around March.
I was thinking March.
Yep, and then we will put it out to bid, get things back. I think we would use, I don't know, June to start vetting some potential providers, and then hopefully jump in the next budget year after July and engage with a vendor or a consultant around next steps with that. And then the athletic program review we just talked about, we would need to think about the RFP process, and we haven't done any thinking around that yet, around that or the funding. So there's work to be done there.
Leslie, I think one thing also with all of our reviews, if you look at this, the way that we've laid them out right now, we know that like a lot of content areas want reviews and haven't happened in, with COVID and the shutdown and the reorganization. And I think one thing that we've been super cognizant of is not pulling on the same teachers at the same time. So if you look, like our EL review was going on, and that's our elementary teachers and the CST was our elementary, more general ed teachers. So just being really cognizant. So when we go into the ELA review, that's also going to get towards the middle school teachers as well. So just figuring out where we are in each one so that we are not pulling on multiple teacher resources at the same time.
And I think that one of the things, maybe can we stop sharing, Michelle?
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely.
I think that one of the things that has happened, I haven't been able to find the schedule for reviews prior to this, because what I wanted to present to you all was what was the proposed schedule of reviews and what has happened to date. I know that the math program review, I came in 2017, and that's the first review that I have been here for, prior to the middle school review and all that. And I think that part of the reason why the programs and curriculum areas haven't been reviewed on a consistent timeline is because of capacity. And so, and I'm totally I'm suspecting this, but it takes a lot of work to do that. And so I'm thinking that might be how we fell off a schedule track for these reviews. And so what is happening is everybody wants a review. So, I already know that, world language really wants a review. So I know Tanya's going to be asking me how Carlin jumped in front of her, but Carlin, that was something that came up. There were policy questions around the sex ed curriculum. Again, the landscape is really changing around how we talk about these issues. And so we had to do that now. And so, we really want to get back onto a course of scheduled reviews where people can expect that they're coming. What were you saying, Michelle?
The math took 2 years to study, and then another year of implementation and studying our own results within the implementation.
Yeah.
And I think we do have to be careful, because even though we're getting capacity from the outside, it's expensive we need to have a funding source even to run the ELA and the middle school next year. And Carlin, I think, is putting into general fund the sex education. That's
the second part.
Right, the second part, that's that really taps into our resources financially and time-wise as well.
And we did, the sex ed curriculum came up quickly, and so we are paying for that through the OTL general fund. So that just kind of gives the landscape of what we're thinking. I think as we move forward with the ELA review and we move forward with the athletics review, we're going to have to take a pause for a little while because the other piece to the reviews is then the whole implementation phase. And so we don't want to get jammed up where we have all these reviews and then we don't have the capacity to do the follow-up work. So I think we've got a good amount on our plate right now. And I think in the interim, while we're doing this work, one of the things I'm hoping that OTL will continue to do is project out and make a schedule for reviews, that will happen in the next couple of years. That's all we have.
Sorry, now I've got dog barking. So. Are there questions? I see Suzanne and then Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. It's not a question. I'm just agreeing with you, Leslie. There's a lot on your plate. And somehow there's too much. I think it's because of this back pent up demand. we went too long with kind of not having this. But so my concern is we have all this wonderful data, in the first phase when we're having our consultants come in. And then I'm just afraid the data is just going to sit there. And by the time we get to it, it'll be 5 years and it'll be old. So I don't have an answer, but I do think we need to figure out how to not just think of it as reviews as ending after our consultants are done with the discovery phase, but how do we then do the design and implementation phase? And, how else do we find the money for that? And the personnel, we've got, you're like a 3-person department. I know we've got the coordinators, but in terms of, getting all this data and all this information, and how do we then make sure that we do something with it in a timely fashion? So I feel your pain. I really appreciate all the work you're doing, but let us know what kinds of things we can do very specifically to help you move forward into the design and the implementation phases.
Sure. And it really is a team effort, Suzanne. So for instance, with the CST RTI review, Lisa's department is going to play a real hand in that too. So it's not just OTL. It could be that OTL commission the review, but then there are other departments that support the follow-up. Even thinking about, for instance, the ELA review, that will really target a certain group, right? And so I would imagine that then we're going to get our specialists involved in next steps with that, which there's a lot more capacity. Like if you think about the ELA department through the specialists and the coaches to then support any follow-up and next steps. So there are particular places where the next phase could be tough and the capacity isn't quite what we need, but then there are other reviews where the capacity will be there. And I also expect that with the middle school review, there's going to be a big part of that that's going to coincide with Dr. Guillory's strategic planning process.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think you can't just be a 3-person department and say you're gonna handle it. You won't be able to do it. It's just not possible. So,
Right.
yeah, looking to all your buddies and, even people that are not in the office so much as, in the schools and finding some leaders there to take that on would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think a really concrete example of that shows up in the sex ed review. Like right now, we're focused on the 5th grade intro to adolescence curriculum. And so Carlin, Megara, who's the representative from the organization, and then the 5th grade teachers are really doing the work.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be impacted by the middle school review. They're not really impacted by the 6 through 12 social studies review, right? The social studies teams can then go do their work while we do the middle school review, right? And this is exactly why like fitting the puzzle pieces, right, is really important. Like doing literacy and doing math at the same time would be impossible. Adding athletics, right, isn't going to tap our existing resources.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Good example.
Steven?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I have a ton of in the weeds questions, and I'm not going to ask any of them because that's a waste of everybody's time. But I just want to say, Jennifer, I think this would be a great topic for a longer conversation about how we treat reviews as a district for a few reasons. One, it occurs to me just the fact that I have a ton of questions. I can't be alone. Like these reviews are of a lot of interest to a lot of people. I think communicating out about these reviews is going to be really interesting to a lot of people. So it occurs to me that this is like an analog of the kind of work Helen and Mariah are doing with capital expenditures, just having an up-to-date tracker of what the reviews are and what they're working on and what the timeline is on that would be really interesting to people. I think people are trying to put that kind of information together. But nothing bigger than a spreadsheet that you just already showed us, though, because this doesn't need to be like some kind of dynamic dashboard that needs to be updated. That's do not want to add to your load in that suggestion. But also listening to this made me think that that there's a mechanism missing. So OTL is like working in both directions, right? Like you, on the one hand, you're like day-to-day managing a culture to empower lots of staff, right? Like lots of administration and lots of teachers to be able to be really nimble every day to respond to the needs of the students in the classrooms. And on the other hand, you have to pay attention to the structures that can enable or inhibit our classrooms from being equitable and excellent. So you've got this program review mechanism, which is huge. It's expensive and it takes place over a long period of time, but it's kind of the only mechanism that we have that is really aligned with Dr. Guillory's vision of being really methodological and taking a deep look, a data-driven look at what's going on in our schools and responding really not in a panic, but in a deliberate, thorough way to what the actual problem is.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got those two things, but I think we need a smaller, more nimble way to deal with structural issues that crop up. And you kind of do that anyway, right? Like we do that with disproportionality findings. We can't just program a 5-year, $200,000 consultancy to deal with disproportionality. We have to scramble on our feet for that. So, but we have to do that reactively because we have to do that when there are findings from the state. So I guess all of this is to ask you a question, which is, are there mechanisms that you know of outside of these giant RFPs that you think we could use for more nimble structural activities that would be proactive, so that there must be like low-hanging fruit that drive you nuts every day that are clearly structural that you want to deal with, but just can't worm their way onto your agenda because it's like it's a giant turf battle. There are many more things that are ahead of you in line. And the only hammer you have is this giant hammer that you can only swing once every few years at a great cost. Like, is there some other tool that you can use that's not this giant consultancy to deal with structural problems? Is my question making sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we end up because you can't wait on some of these things, we end up just dealing with them in the moment. So it's not as though because the review's happening, we just take a full pause and don't address a particular area. There are still things happening in that area. I mean, I think a good example is, for instance, literacy. So, you know, we have implemented M-Class, we've looked at our interventions. So there's this work that we're doing outside of a review, that when the review happens, that will be included. But you're right, there's this low-hanging fruit that we can grab. And so we do that. But then also sometimes there are problems of practice or issues that we actually just can't wait on. If they're negative, if there's something happening that's negatively impacting students, then we can't wait. We just have to address it there. And then at some point it will show up in a review, or if it's not scheduled for a review, then, you know, it might not, but we still have to kind of work in tandem and handle some of those issues. Gabe and Michelle, I don't know if you have any other examples.
Well, just to make this more concrete, like, here's an example that pops to mind for me is science and social studies minutes. I feel like it's just an issue that kicks around constantly, that when you look at the data that Magna Chakrabarty had put together, you see like the slow erosion of those minutes over time. I don't really think that needs like a full review to come up with a policy change relating to that. Maybe some people do. I clearly don't speak for the full committee, but it seems like the sort of issue that an OTL could say, like, just to take a mechanism that this could be like newbie innocence, that I think may be easier than it is. It could be like, hey, school committee, can you put together like a volunteer parent force to take a quick analysis of the time on learning for science and social studies over the past decade, see what the neighboring districts are doing, just feed us back that information to see if we want to make a quick adjustment for academic year 24-25 or something like that, like looking that far ahead. Because we know we're not going to get that on the program review calendar anytime in the next 2 years. Like, does that kind of mechanism, would that ever make sense to do something like that?
I think we do that. And like, I think we have that information. Like, we've gone through with our own schools and figured out what that time on learning is. And we've looked at other districts. Like, actually, Leslie and I keep having the same conversation about that. I think there are some mechanisms that are in place district-wide that also make having what you're talking about, these other mechanisms, work. So for example, like the narrative of time being eroded in science, it was actually that from OTL, we had asked people to teach more minutes than are in a day. So we have more curriculum out there with a shortened day and a lot of things that we value. And so I think that is something that makes those mechanisms a little bit hard because we don't have them. And I think the other piece of that as well is that would make some of these things not creep up as much is we don't have structured professional learning time with teachers. And so we're unable to be working on these things regularly. And that's a piece that, like, as OTL, we don't have a lot of control over, except for trying to have people want to come to PD and to work with them that way. And so I think there are some things just inherently in the way we're structured as a district that have moved us away from being able to like hit a mechanism. And then I think the other thing, just to name it, is OTL lost a position 2 years ago. So even if we had the PD director there that could be doing other work, we're spread thin, we're very lean for a department of a school district this size.
I totally hear that. And I could see all of this being rationale for adding headcount. I guess I'm wondering if any of this is also rationale for putting together like a 6-month task force to study issue A, B, or C, when you know you're not going to have the bandwidth for the next 2 years to take a real swing at it.
I think it really depends on the actual issue. And I think to your original point of like issues that may appear simple on the surface are quite challenging and quite difficult, right? Like Michelle's point of historically, we did ask teachers to teach an impossible schedule, right? Like, so there's a lot in there to unpack. The day-to-day work, and it's part of why partnering with these outside organizations has really helped, because we have, while doing all these reviews, been able to land the dyslexia screener with MClass, right? We're embarking on work to, examine this 8th to 9th grade transition in a way that we've never really done before. We've only talked around.
So does that mean like a smaller mechanism isn't really worth the investment because it's not really going to be thorough enough to make a meaningful change, do you think, in general?
Again, I think it depends on scale.
Oh,
Sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think, Stephen, no, I think it's really important to have that information. So but I don't want to diminish that. I don't want to diminish that information. The issue is, even if we learned, which we may very well learn, that other districts have time for science and social studies in their elementary thing, we as a district would have to give something up in order to mitigate. So it's not just a matter of us saying, teach less of everything else to increase science and social studies. We actually physically don't have the minutes in our day to do everything that we've valued.
Okay, maybe that one was a bad example.
No,
Or maybe you're saying to me there aren't any good examples. Maybe that's the real message I should be hearing from you guys.
Well,
I guess I just saw that original 5-year chart that you put up for the program review, and my heart sank. I was like, is this what a program review is going to have to be? Like, then my heart went back up when I saw Leslie's, when I saw the list and they were all like 7 months, 8 months. I was like, okay, this can happen in like within a year. It's not all 5 years. But I guess I was wondering, are there really no other mechanisms besides the program review that could allow us to implement policy change on a more rapid time scale that doesn't take as thorough a look, but could still create meaningful change on issues that you already know to be low hanging fruit? But I guess your response to me is they're more complicated than you think, Stephen. Don't think that we could just take light swings at some issues and really get on base. I'll stop with the metaphor. Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, the time on learning, the science, so that's a huge one, and it is wildly complex. Really. This is just my personal stance. I think how we're going to have to get at that is through curriculum integration, which that is a long period of work to actually do that and do that well. Our first kind of start at the time on learning was with the K-5 scope and sequences to really lay out, okay, what's the teacher expected to teach? What's the expected amount of time that will take? And then we mapped it out and we think it fits. And then it was the process of last year, teachers trying the scope and sequence to see, does it actually fit? So then we would have a good sense. Now, where we fell short with that was that we really wanted to have these robust feedback sessions, but the teacher, we didn't have a contract for the majority of last year and people were just burnt out. So we didn't get the type of feedback on the scope and sequence, but that's something that could be, revitalized and we look at again. But so there are these little steps that we take in the interim, but I think that the time on learning question, that's just a really big one because we need more time in the day. And the curriculum integration that's how a lot of other districts are getting at it.
So I see Suzanne has a question. Thank you for responding. And I just want to keep an eye on the time. And also we're starting to veer off of the agenda at this point. It's related to reviews, but we're going. Stephen, do you feel satisfied with the level of response you're able to get sort of in this?
Oh, yeah.
Feedback?
Thanks for engaging with this question. So
No, it's really,
so
these are great ideas and big, important bodies of work. Suzanne, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to kind of piggyback on what Stephen's saying. Some of it's a compliance issue. And so when we get that, we do put it at the head of the line. And, who we've not really talked about are our school building leaders. And they are instructional leaders. And so, having conversations, not us, but the departments and the superintendent, talking to our school leaders about, what is compliance and what is time on learning and what does that look like and who's done it well and how did they do it and who's struggling. They can, there are other, I'm just trying to give you some other alternatives to a total program review that, there can be conversations with people in positions to really make a difference. And, we haven't really been including school leaders, but I think that, they're powerful, as Leslie knows, within their schools to make cultures and and schedules and all that work the best they can. And so that's another big resource I think that we should look to get some answers to, really frankly, some of these compliance issues with it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and there are some problems of practice that we really have a good sense of what we need to do to solve it. Maybe the solution is very challenging to implement, but we have a good idea. Then there are other problems of practice where it's just like, whoa, what's going on? I think the middle school review is that one of those examples where we're like, what is going on with FTE? You know, if you work at Runkle versus if you work at Lawrence, if you teach the same content area, are you teaching the same amount of time? You know, what does that look like? What does choice look like in different buildings and minute time on learning? There was just a lot that we just needed some support in really knowing the true data on. But then other pieces we're more aware of what the issues are and potentially how to solve them. So we don't really need a review, just need to do the work.
Are there any other questions or comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, I'm actually, the next item on our agenda is one of great sadness for me and our school district and our students. But I wanted to make sure that we took some time at Curriculum Subcommittee to really share appreciation and a farewell for Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Leslie Ryan Miller, who will be leaving us at the end of the month, if I understand correctly. And I spoke at full committee at our last meeting last Thursday. And I had sort of prepared some things to help me guide my way and ended up in tears. So I'm not going to do that again. And I want to share for myself and anyone else who wants to speak how grateful I have been to have you in this position. I've been sleeping better. I feel and I'll put the emphasis on had been sleeping better. So I'm very deeply appreciative of the work that you've helped to structure in the department and the work that I think we've been able, in some ways to do together, but also the district and your department and, restructuring it. And I just sort of backtrack to when you came into this position. Really, I felt Keith was able to come in and really see things and see in a overarching manner, to be able to come in and see the bodies of work that needed to be done and what were the foundational pieces that needed to be in place to begin this work in this position. And just so appreciative of the work you've done. We're such a benefit to the students and to our faculty and to all of our staff and central office and in our school buildings, and to the school committee, so the whole community. And it's a giant loss, and I'm so grateful that we have some other great leaders in the office that you've been working with, and Gabe and Michelle, that will be able to help support this work in our time of transition and continue the great work they're doing. But I will miss you so greatly. I love working with you, and I think that it's just been amazing having you in this position. And so I'm going to keep on holding out onto that little glimmer of hope that until the end of the month, it's not real, in case you change your mind. But I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate the great work that you've done, and we'll really miss you, truly.
Oh, thank you, Jen. And you've been a fantastic liaison. I know we work really well together. And so, I will definitely miss your support. And I think that this was a great model for how the school committee and district leadership can work together effectively and efficiently. And it's hard to go. There's a lot that I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss being here. And I'll say that I do feel like the department is in a really good position to continue the work. I think the way that Gabe and Michelle and I operate, we really do almost everything together. We're aware of one another's work. And so, we had transition meetings set up on the calendar every week for the last 3 months. And I'll say, we really used the first month, and then there wasn't a lot of planning to do because we understand each other's work. And so the real issue, the only concern I have is putting too much on Gabe and Michelle's plate and just understanding their capacity. But again, we'll see what happens with this position. And they both know when to say no and when to ask for help when they need it, and they're able to prioritize their work. And so, I think that you'll see the work move forward. I'm also really proud of the way that we restructured the department. I think changing the senior director from a senior director of programs to secondary has been highly impactful. To have someone at the high school, that has been incredible. And so I think that's maybe one of the best decisions that I made in the position, because people are really accessing Gabe a lot. We have more of a tie between the high school and central office, which is really important. We're able to support the school and understand what the needs are. So I think that the department is still, I think it's set up for success. The work's going to continue. And I feel really good about that.
I do too, but I will still miss you.
I'll miss you too, Jen. I'll miss the subcommittee.
Yeah, yes. Well, yeah, I have to stop because now I'm going to get Stephen, take over.
Did everybody really speak about this at the full school committee? I'm so glad I missed that because I wouldn't have made it. I was on a family vacation last week. I just want to say that I frequently flash back in school committee and subcommittee meetings on being just like an anxious parent in the audience of a school committee meeting, and like trying to understand what the systems are in Brookline and PSB, and being frustrated what I was listening to, and trying to understand the direction of PSB and its curriculum. And then when you took over and I started listening to the stuff you were saying in the meetings, everything just made a lot of sense all the time. And I saw the team you were putting together and everything that your team was saying. Not only just made sense, it was delivered by seemingly reasonable people. No, you could tell by the team you're putting together too. Like everyone speaks so intelligently with like real team spirit. It's just like I feel I say this to you, like I just feel a real sense of confidence with you in this position, and it's not just because I feel like you're like a sane, intelligent leader, but I also know that you know how to drive change. Like you're like quiet and persistent about your change, and there's just like there's no stopping you. Like you just do it over time and it happens, and you just can't stop Leslie from doing the thing that she's going to do. And that's kind of amazing. And I think it's a huge loss for Brookline. I really do. Like I'm hopeful that we'll find someone who's really strong in the position. I have to be, right? Like I'm on the school committee is so important. Like in the things that I care about in PSB, like I work in education. I work on international education programs. I care about the stuff that goes on inside the classroom most of all. That's the stuff that really animates me. Like you could see it in the meetings. So it's these topics that get me really like most passionate. So I hope we find someone. It's not just about what gets me most passionate. Like this stuff really matters for Brookline, but it also like matters for for what feels rewarding for me also, I guess, in my participation in the school committee. So I'm just going to miss your sane, competent, committed, change-making energy in PSB for real, Leslie. So
Oh, thank
that's
you.
what I got to say. I'm glad I didn't have to say that before more people.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And again, it's this subcommittee. It's been a pleasure to work with everyone on this subcommittee. I really like the cadence of our work. I think it was a great practice how we were able to present some things here for feedback before we took it to the larger committee. So this committee has been really helpful in our practice in asking us the challenging questions so that we can think critically about them and be prepared for what might come our way. So I'm very thankful for you, Stephen. Thank you.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I know we have 1 minute and that's fine. Because I have said some of this before, but I just do want to point out, Leslie, that in your year and like 4 months in this position, you have done more than was done in the 5 years previously. So, you know, your focus and your vision and then the work and with your team is just been so valuable to us. I mean, just look at the reviews that we're looking at and how much you've done in such a short period of time, and the legacy you're leaving, both in the way the department has been set up and in the work that you and your team have done. So you will not get as much done in Boston as fast. And you know that.
That is true. That is true.
When you get frustrated, just know that we're 1.8 away from you, and you can either come visit or you can come back, and we will definitely have a space for you. But you know, good for Boston to get you, and it is sad for us that we are losing you, but you have set us up as well as you could, if not even more so. And I do appreciate that you did that for us. So thank you, Leslie, for that. And, you know, best of luck. I know our paths will cross again.
Our paths will definitely cross.
I know they
and
will.
I appreciate the open invitation more than you know.
Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll be a wonderful winter break coming up. So just as a reminder, it is an early dismissal in our K-8s at noon, and I believe 12:15 at the high school, if I have that right, on this Friday. And we will be on winter break until and through Monday. So there'll be no school on Monday, January 2nd. So, right. And so Tuesday starts on, school starts on Tuesday, January 3rd for all of our K through 12 schools, and BEEP as well, if I believe I have that correct. Leslie, again, just such a great appreciation for all the high leverage work. I've really developed some new language that I find myself using all the time that I know comes from Leslie in my head. A lot of high leverage work and a real sense of understanding the technical and adaptive challenges that we have, and really showing that very clearly and explaining it well. It's just wonderful. So I really look forward to continuing to work with Gabe and Michelle as we continue to work in OTL, and we'll reconvene in January unless there's any new business. So I don't think we have any at this time. We will reconvene in January, where we will be taking up topics under potential new recommendations for courses at the high school in particular. So that will be our January meeting. And then we will theoretically make a comment on those to go before the full committee the following Tuesday, that same week on Tuesday. So I knew this would be hard. I don't know how, I don't want to say goodbye. So we'll just say, see you soon. And thank you everyone for coming tonight, and have a wonderful break.
Have a good one. Thank you, everybody.